Hi everyone, Ken Good here from Beyond the Teams. I would like to take a minute or so to highlight an exceptionally important need that has come to our attention. We would like you to carefully consider stepping into this story and respond to a call to action. As many of you know, U.S. military forces withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021. That withdrawal had an incredible impact on the people in Afghanistan in general, but it also particularly impacted a highly motivated and professionally trained group of women that risked everything that was meaningful in this life to support the efforts to unseat the Taliban along with their tyranny. What follows on this video is a recast of a Zoom briefing with the Beyond the Teams board members and Tom Villalan and his unprecedented efforts to rescue Afghan women now. Please consider taking 15 minutes of your times to get the big picture, and more importantly, we would like to ask you to financially support this effort directly through the Rescue Afghan Women Now website or through the Beyond the Team specific fundraising portal to get these women and their family out of harm's way as soon as possible. It's very important. Links will be in the description. Thank you so much for your ongoing generosity and indomitable spirits. Yeah, Tom, could you introduce yourself and give us the big picture? I was telling Mike that I wish I would have recorded this earlier so you wouldn't have to go through it again, but the whole operation and the story is compelling.
Sure.
So that's why we have you here to kind of give that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, first, let me start out by saying thank you, everyone, for what you guys are doing, and thank you for your service. I'm not sure if everyone here is a SEAL or served in the military, but for those who have, a deep, heartfelt thank you for everything you've done and the position that the sacrifices you've made for our country. My name's Tom. I'm a former international lawyer based out of primarily East Asia, out of Seoul, Korea, and then most recently New York. And I have no real connection to Central Asia. However, during the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, was sort of had a crisis of conscience, seeing the way that we left the country and the way that we left a lot of very outspoken and courageous U.S. allies behind. Long story short, I ended up quitting my job to try to focus, to do anything I could to help sort of at-risk, vulnerable Afghans that had openly served alongside U.S. forces that were sort of just left, the ones that weren't able to get manifested out. I moved to Hawaii about a year ago, and I got connected with an Army Reserve captain who personally trained many members of what are called the Female Tactical Platoon, the FTPs, which is Afghanistan's only all-female special forces group, who are all trained by U.S. Special Forces and deployed alongside U.S. Special Forces.
دخترها دفعه اول که جذب شدن اینجا تقریبا 2 ماه یا دوره بیسیک یا ابتداییه دارن که در این دوره مثلا از فیزیکی شروع، درسای فیزیکی است، انداخت است، فصل.
The FTPs, about half of them or so were able to get manifested out during the withdrawal in August of 2021. The other half were just sort of left behind, and for no real rhyme or reason, just bad luck, bad timing, not at the right place at HKIA on the right day. And these women, as I'm sure you can imagine, are extremely vulnerable. Our understanding is that they're considered to be the most vulnerable at-risk Afghan population for Taliban retribution. They not only served alongside U.S. Special Forces in raiding Taliban strongholds, but they're also ethnic minorities. They tend to be Hazara women. They tend to be Shia minorities. And so for many, many reasons, the Taliban want them eliminated. We are in touch with what we believe is every single remaining FTP who's still alive in the country. And we've developed a roster that's a total of about 185 people, including all immediate dependents. So these women oftentimes have children, typically around the age of 5 or younger. They have a husband. The family units are all included in our roster. And it's about 185. That number kind of slips up and down. A couple of folks for some interesting reasons. But we're in real-time communications with every single one of our target populations. And so we communicate primarily through encrypted channels. We know where they are in Afghanistan. And essentially our organization, and I say organization with soft quotes because we're not yet a legal entity. It's just an informal group of 4 people. Me, this Army Reserve captain, and 2 other private sector individuals. We sort of informally made this group called Rescue Afghan Women Now. We're well on our way to getting sort of fiscal sponsorship so we can have a 501c3 status, so we can do sort of more broad fundraising. But this organization, we essentially operate in 3 tiers simultaneously. The first tier is, because we're in touch with every single one of these women, first thing we do is that we process priority 1 refugee applications through the DoD and through the Pentagon. So we have a good relationship, a good working relationship with the DoD, and almost 100% of our target roster has had their P1 applications submitted. The majority now have been approved, so they have ARR numbers, so they're essentially being tracked now by the US government and processed. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the P1 process, but it essentially moves at some level from the DoD to the State Department, and the State Department's in charge of essentially doing the background vetting and manifesting and getting these families out for forward processing. So that's our first step. In tandem with that first step of sort of processing and making sure the visa, the paperwork is underway, we manage threats to these women on a real-time or near real-time basis. And if we have a high degree of confidence that there will be Taliban capture and execution, typically within 24 hours to 72 hours, then we develop essentially an exfiltration option. We can't call it a mission because obviously we're a civilian organization, but we partner with some special forces veterans groups, most notably Army Delta Force guys, Delta Force veterans. And essentially what we do is we coordinate with them with logistics, and we say, hey, here's this family. We think they're going to get rolled in 48 hours. Here are their passports. This child's missing a passport. We need Pakistan visas. We have to get them safe housed. And so what we'll do is that we have a relationship with these groups that will go intercept these families, safe house them. We process all of the back end paperwork, the civil documents, and then we work on essentially an overland exfiltration to Pakistan. To be very clear, and I'll put on sort of my lawyer hat here for a second, the groups with whom we operate they're US nonprofits, and they have full and all necessary licenses from the Treasury Department. So OFAC and FinCEN. So essentially, obviously as a private individual, I can't just go and send $1,000 to someone in Afghanistan without running afoul of someone's, someone on the sanctioned list. So we only operate with the full support and all the licensing that we need to for folks to operate in Central Asia. And we never move someone across a border unless it's 100% above board and legal. So we only, we process legitimate passports, legitimate Pakistan visas. Every single one of our targets that we get into Pakistan, their visas are renewed in a very timely manner, usually well ahead of schedule. So we make it very clear that we're certainly not breaking any US laws, restrictions, or regulations, but we're even playing fair, believe it or not, by Pakistan and even Afghan laws and regulations. So, and then the third step is ultimate resettlement for forward processing and ultimate, resettlement into the United States, which is sort of a long-term goal. Our group has been necessarily and intentionally a little bit under the radar for most of this past year. And the reason for that is, we had a very defined list of people that we were trying to help. We're not trying to rescue everyone from Afghanistan, just these extremely vulnerable women that serve in the military alongside US Special Forces that has been completely left behind. And we sort of got on the radar of some folks in a good way when we rescued one family who was a high value target from the Talibs. And we learned later they were specifically targeted by the head of Taliban intelligence, a real piece of work named Abdul Haq Wasik, who spent, I think, 14 years in Gitmo and was released during the prisoner exchange that happened. And I think he was one of 5 or 7 essentially Taliban detainees in Gitmo that were released. From that point, we sort of got put on the radar as this very small group of, primarily civilians with this one Army Reserve captain that were doing some pretty interesting things. And we were essentially connected to a journalist, George Packer at The Atlantic, who's sort of the top journalist for Afghanistan. He's been writing on it for, the 20 years that we've been there, been de facto sort of embedded in our virtual team for the past couple of months. And there's an article that was supposed to come out yesterday, but I think the deadline from his board got pushed till today, but it should be coming out any moment. And it's about our efforts of our small group. He's interviewed some of the families that we've saved in Pakistan and even some of the families that are still in Afghanistan, which is the first time we've ever let anyone do that. But essentially, we are sort of trying to anticipate this thing becoming a little bit more of a national story. We've been successful in, so most of our work is actually just safe housing people within Afghanistan, and just by targeted money and medicine drops. It's much cheaper, much more efficient to keep them in country if they're relatively safe. Exfiltrating them to Pakistan is a complicated process, and it's also a very expensive process, and it's unclear how long they have to be in Pakistan before they're forward processed somewhere else. So we try to keep people in Afghanistan unless we really believe that within 1 to 3 days they'll be they'll be rolled, or more realistically they'll commit suicide before they're captured, because they're well aware of what happens when the Talibs capture them. And to be clear, this is, they have young children. So when they're contemplating suicide, they're contemplating, as humanely as possible, killing their children, then killing themselves, because they know what will happen if they're found alive. We've had one rescue that was actually not an FTP. It was a KKA commando who was very well connected to all the remaining the KKAs that were left behind. He was actually captured by Taliban and horrifically tortured for about 8 months. He had 5 young kids. The oldest, I think is about 15 or 16. The youngest is about 1. And the kids were essentially sold into slavery to work in some salt mines. The father was, at his wit's end, being horrifically tortured through a process that I was not involved in, and our team was not directly involved in, at least as I'm aware. There was some kind of agreement brokered to let this guy temporarily out of Taliban custody. The second he touched soil, we gave the instruction to basically just run and hide anywhere you can. And we eventually intercepted him, got him safe housed, reunited him with his 5 children, and then they successfully got into Pakistan, all of them safely, the father, the mother, and the 5 children, just a couple of weeks ago. We are the only group, as far as I'm aware, that has actually gotten called for manifesting flights out from IOM that's working through CARE to evacuate folks from HKIA out. So to date, just to be very clear, there have been 0 P1s from Afghanistan relocated to the United States since August of 2021. And I can't say so with any certainty, but based off of all the data points I've collected over the past year, but really over the past 6 weeks, I think we might be the first. And it's sort of a perfect storm. So this Atlantic article that's coming out momentarily is going to be really critical. We think that it'll be big enough to get the ear of the Secretary of State. Hopefully, we're triaging other contacts to try to push folks as high up as possible to see if we can get the appropriate pressure and inflection point to get our populations manifested out. This is a very new experience for me personally, just to be clear. I have no military background, no intelligence background. I have no ties to Central Asia whatsoever. I'm sort of an ersatz linguist, so I quit my job and I started teaching myself Dari and Pakhto in an effort to help communicate with some of these folks. And I just always refused to quit. There's 1,000 ways that a mission sort of like ours will come to a standstill. but the only way it's defeated is if people stop trying for it. So whenever we hit a barrier, what I always do is take a step back, see how I can remove the barrier, jump above it, go around it, or find someone else that can sort of translate it to an opportunity. And then we just repeated that process every day for a little bit over a year now. And we feel like we're very close to sort of the finish line. What success looks like for our organization would be to get every single member of our roster forward processed. And then basically they'd be on the US government's dime for forward vetting, USCIS, and then eventually relocation to the US. We are at sort of a crisis point in terms of financing. So up till now, we've been entirely self-financed and sort of friends and family donations. So when this started, I quit my job and sort of just gave everything I had to this, cashed in my 401k, my retirement savings, and just try to spend every waking moment possible trying to figure out whatever the problem was to move the ball forward downfield. Once we sort of all tapped out our individual, financial resources, we started going out to friends and family. And then that was part of our calculus for trying to expand and get a little bit more of a media story or a national story so we could expand our fundraising. Our last operation was this operation of 3 families that included that Taliban prisoner with his 5 children. It was an expensive operation, and it wiped us out to essentially a pretty bare minimum. We have a couple $1,000s left in the bank account. We have ongoing expenses just in Pakistan alone of probably close to, now that the more people we get over, the more those prices increase. It's probably close to about $10K a month. There's ways that we're trying to defray those costs. But, we're sort of, scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of financing. So we're very eager to do everything we can to try to do any kind of targeted fundraisers, increase our donor base, maybe even look for institutional support. And as part of that effort, we're signing on with a fiscal sponsor so that we can use a 501c3 status for individual donors or institutions that would require it to give funds. Everyone we've talked to so far is extremely. I've never met anyone who's not extremely interested in trying in some way to support the mission of this work. Everyone recognizes these women are extraordinarily brave and extraordinarily vulnerable. There is one issue I'll raise just before I sort of close the spiel, which is, there's a political risk associated with all of this. It's hard to discuss Afghanistan in any way without it becoming a very politically charged issue. We are very mission focused in the sense the message becomes too politicized one way or the other, it hurts our efforts because we rely on people that are on both sides of the aisle, both in government currently and in military and veterans groups, that our ultimate goal is, our mission is we have to save these 185 women and their families, and anything that serves that mission moves the ball downfield. Anything that diverts it to a different political conversation detracts from the mission. And so that's been a big challenge for us. We're very lucky that we got George Packer at The Atlantic because I think he writes honestly about Afghanistan. I think he holds the administration accountable, but in a way that is sort of palatable. And women that are discussing about, there's only thing left because America's forgotten them, that they have to commit suicide. That's the only humanitarian thing to do. Then we get those same families into Pakistan, and some of the messages that we get from them are just so heartbreakingly beautiful. All of these women, their number one goal in life is protect their family, come to America, and then enlist in the United States military. That's their lifelong goals, and they all want to serve. They are so rabidly pro-American that it's absolutely inspiring. I can't think of a more deserving group of people. They're true warriors, and I feel very honored to play a very minor and limited role in getting their story out and getting their successes out. So that's sort of our group in a nutshell. Happy to answer any questions you guys may have. I'm sure you have loads.